So this is a very beautiful theme, loosely entitled Truth Be Spoken, which addresses 4 levels of speech. And we will go very gently into this theme. As a motto, right, as a prologue, as let's say the introduction to that theme, I'd like to utter one short line. All form in its essence is sound condensed as matter. This is a leitmotif of all modern science. This literally, the scientific investigations arrived to a point when we understood this whole entire creation, this whole entire universe, in terms of the myriad of sounds being expressed through any particular form of phenomena. However, nowhere but in Vedic sciences, in Vedic culture, as well as in Tantric tradition, the signs on its own have been made with regard to this very process. And when we say with regard to this very process, we mean the process whereby consciousness as absolute, immanent, the self, expresses itself quantifiably through progressively expanding stages of sound. So the 4 levels of speech are not only interest us here from the point of view of how we relate to each other, how we communicate, and how this communication is in fact possible. Because this theme will cover all these aspects of communication. Also the origin and the root of language. But what interests us above all else here is that this very process is not only relevant to the way of the language, all the languages, but it is relevant to the way consciousness expresses itself, full stop, as this world, as this universe. So, before we roll into that, I would like to very briefly introduce you, to map you, the very terminology with which Vedic and Tantric science operates in mapping that process. So according to these teachings, there are four distinctively different levels of speech. They are para, that absolute, which stands for the self, undifferentiated whole, the totality in its immanence and immutability. The second stage is known as Pashyanti. That first impulse, that subtlest and most faintest level of feeling, which is still undifferentiated. However, there is a vibration, there is a quiver, there is a feeling added to it. Only to progressively move towards what is known as Madhyama. Madhyama literally means the middle one, It is that level where that sound becomes cognized on the level of the mind. It is the speech on the level of the mind where thought is cognized. And it is being expressed through the fourth, known as Vaikari, sometimes spelled Baikari. And Vaikari is that fully expressed speech which requires vocal cords for it to reach the level of communication or for it to be carried out. So you see there are four distinctive stages, four distinctive levels: Para, Pashyanti, Madhyama, Vaikari. From Para, from the undifferentiated, absolute, to Vaikari, that which manifests itself as audible sound. Because of that Vaikari, you can hear me now. To give it another spin, so there is a greater grasp of this topic, I am inviting you to view this from the point of view of modern quantum science. The Para and Pashyanti here stand for waves. They are literally waves. Waves before they collapse into particles. It is on the level of Madhyama, at the level of that middle one, is where that distinctive collapse takes place. The wave collapses into a particle and becomes something, becomes a thing. Even if it's on the level of the thought, in its stage of gestation, it's already a thing. As we know, everything is a thought before it becomes a thing. So you have these two distinctive stages of differentiation. One is undifferentiated ocean of sound in the form of waves. And this is Para and Pashyanti. But soon as the wave collapses into a particle, it becomes literally something particular. Hence, Madhyama only to manifest itself as Vaikari, as that which is audibly perceivable. If some of you are not aware of, let's say, of this phenomenon of waves versus particles, I welcome you just to look on your own, just Google double slit experiment. And that's all you need to do. That double slit experiment will give you plenty food for thought and will give you beautiful explanations of how quantum physics actually functions. There's nothing else you need to understand, and that's not me who is saying that. Quantum physicists themselves saying, if you want to understand quantum physics, all you need to understand is that which have been tested hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, over and over, with the same absolutely identical results. And that is known as the double slit experiment, where literally waves collapse into particles and certain conditions are given to examine that in greater depth. But it's not our subject. This is just to give you a perspective, the scientific perspective behind that beautiful, timeless knowledge of the four levels of speech with which Vedic and Tantric sciences or traditions operate, giving that direct insight into the nature of the creative process. So everything on this level of creation is a result of that process. Absolutely everything. Hence that line, that sound, the form in its essence is sound condensed as matter. So all this myriad of sounds, all this manifests as this world. And that very process is actually reflected and perfectly carried through the way we communicate to each other on a daily basis. This process is literally find its expression through this very human physiology and the way we relate and communicate to each other. But there's something which is very, very important. In various traditional or modern spirituality, in New Age spirituality, certain faculties of consciousness are held responsible. Certain faculties of consciousness are often being nailed by this or that teacher, by this or that approach, as being the reasons for life lived in ignorance. And most commonly, these faculties of consciousness are known as ego and mind. You have to admit it. Whenever you read something, whenever you read or hear 10 satsangs, you read the books, you keep hearing that it is because of the mind. So if you drop the mind, then you know the self, or you be the self. Or it is because of the ego, limitation of the ego, that's what keeps you prisoner of all the conditioning, and that's why you don't know that omniscience of the self is because of the ego. But you see, if we apply this understanding upon which Vedic science operates and rests on, and Vedic, when we say Vedic here, and Tantric, they go hand to hand, they're like sister sciences. They just vary with slight approaches, but they're very, very intimately interconnected. According to this approach, neither ego, nor mind, or any other faculties are actually to be blamed. They are not obstacles and cannot be. They are willing servants of consciousness. They are willing instrumentality of consciousness. However, and we will examine that and keep going back to that so that you have a very, very clear understanding why that is. What is held responsible here is precisely that the way consciousness expresses itself from para to vaikari. It is the language itself that bound the boundless. It is the language itself that becomes that limitation. Precisely because that process of progressive unfoldment within consciousness, from its wave-like state, from its state of least excitation, to that state of when everything is myriad of waves, until these waves bubble up, as scientists also say, foam, bubble up. That bubbling up is here equal to the collapse of waves into particularities or into particles. That very process leads to eventually manifest language, or all languages as we know them. The language itself becomes that opaque factor which conceals the self from itself. The language itself, because of its phonemes and consonants, is a reflection of that process. And yet, it becomes the very factor that limits consciousness to itself on that level where consciousness finds its fullest expression. Isn't that paradoxical? It is precisely for that reason these traditions and these cultures are sonic. Sonic, when we say sonic, is because they utilize the methodology or the instrumentality where that which conceals would have to be used to unlock or find the way back. Hence, the truth be spoken. Don't worry. It may feel tentative. It may even slip your comprehension. That's not the point. I just want you to sit and gently absorb this, because the aha moments will be plenty once you start reflecting upon that. And you are welcome to draw examples from your own upbringing, from your own childhood, from your own parenthood, from your own grandparenthood. You will see how children, how babies, when they come into this world and when they learn to talk, how this whole process of consciousness calcifying to itself from that state of complete fluidity happens through the instrumentality of language.